is a data set?
Hello, I'm Jerry.
Right? And this is the inaugural episode, and we're asking the question of what is a data set? And so, in this episode, we're going to be talking about what is a data set, the different types of data sets, and how these are different from your files on the PC.
All right. So, what is a data set? There was an animated cartoon, and I can't remember the name of it, but this father would always come to his son and ask him computer questions. Well, the question that really popped out the most in my mind was, what is a file? Because he thought it was something you use on wood. So, well, we're looking at what is a data set. So, what is a data set? That is not a data set. That's actually an old school disk drive, which is where data sets actually go to live. Um, a data set is actually like a file on the PC. It's really just a place for you to store your data. But the difference is you give it a name and a place to live. Now, you do that on a PC as well, but your places for it to live are limited by the number of hard disks that you have in your PC. Now, the big difference is that you determine what it's used for. So you allocate this data set and you say, I'm going to use this for my SMF data. I'm going to use this for my programs. So you determine what that data set is used for. Now, there are conventions in an environment where they say, if you actually want to put source into this, you want the last qualifier to be source. So those are kind of things that you conform to. If it's going to be an executable, your load modules, that's going to be a load lib. But once again, like I said, those are conventions. The system doesn't care. If you say, I want to execute this program and the low level qualifier is George, as long as it's got an executable program in there, it's going to take off and run. So you have a lot of flexibility that you don't have in a PC. And we'll talk about that later.
So, now we're going to talk about the different types of data sets that you can have. And the first one is what a lot of people use the most, which is a sequential data set, sometimes called a flat file. And you could think of this as just like a regular file on your PC. It's like a text document. It could be a CSV file, pretty much anything that you have as an actual file that you would open. And the next type is a partitioned data set, which data set in the Z world, so it's kind of like a file, but it's more akin to a folder or a directory. You can have individual members inside of the PDS, and then each of those would be similar to the sequential data set, but again, they're organized within the PDS. And then there's an extension to that where you have the partition dataset extended, where they added more options, more information to the dataset. And you can even have generations. And so, similar to having, uh, backup files, you can have generations of a file of a member within the PDSE. And so, if something happens, you can actually refer back to a previous generation. And so your changes aren't necessarily lost.
And
But
one other good thing about PDSEs is that you don't get multiple copies of the member. In a PDS, it just keeps stacking things in there, and you end up running out of space because it's got like nine. Every time you do a save, it keeps the old copy. So you end up with 900 copies of the same data set, slightly different because you were making changes and saving it, and then you end up running out of space, and then you have to compress it with IB copy.
Yeah, and that's actually another difference too between the PDS and PDSE is in PDSs, it wants to know how much space, how many members are going to be in there, which is referred to as a directory block. And you can run out of those too if you make too many members. So you can run out of directory space, but still have plenty of actual usable space in the PDS. PDSEs, they got rid of that. And the last one, the last type is Virtual Storage Access Method, which is VSAM. It's a newer form of file, and by newer, that's what,
50 years old.
60s? Yeah, yeah. It's still a very old type, but it's a newer type in the grand scheme of things. But there are multiple different types of VSAM data sets. You can have an entry sequence data set, or an ESDS. You can have a key sequence data set, or a KSDS, and a relative record data set, or RDS. But these are all different flavors of VSAM. But Jerry, can you explain the differences between these different sequences?
Yes, I'll be glad to. An ESDS is like a sequential file. It actually is a sequential file. You know, if you want to get to the 10th record, you have to read the first nine to get to it. A key sequence data set, on the other hand, allows you to say, I want the record where the key is Jerry Spencer, and the key is the name. So it'll skip over and it'll go directly to the record that is for Jerry Spencer. The
Yeah.
relative record data set, or RDS, is similar to a KSDS, except you say, I want the 10th record. You know, when we talked about the ESDS, you had to read the first nine to get to the 10th record. With an RRDS, you say, give me the 10th record. And it goes out and gets that 10th record and presents it to you.
Interesting.
All right. So we're going to look at some of the differences between the PC file and data sets on the mainframe. In IBM Z, you got to tell it how much space you need. With a PC, you just say, I want a data set. And it says, okay. And that data set can get as big as the actual disk drive. There are probably some limitations, but it's not just because it said, okay, you've gotten 16 extents and you're done. Now, because you have to tell it how much space you need, you can run out of space. And on a PC, you can run out of space, but that happens when you actually fill up the actual disk drive. Now, like I said, I'm not aware of there being limitations on how much space you can use with a PC file, but that's not an issue generally on a PC. You want to take the next two, Ray?
Yeah, so in other things on the PC, you can give it specific names or an extension in order to tell an application this file belongs to you and you're the one that's supposed to open it. Uh, so you can have like a .exe, which is a standalone executable. It's opened by the operating system. You can have a text file, .txt, which is opened by Notepad, WordPad, uh, any other kind of word processing document. But then you have the docx, which is a very specific word processing document, which belongs to the Microsoft Word application. And there are so many more applications and file extensions that really can't go into it, without spending a ton of time. And uh, again, as I mentioned in the previous section, there's no PDS file type in Windows or Unix, Linux. That's your directory or your folder. And so you store files into that. And so that's about the best parallel that you can get on the PC.
All right. And that concludes our inaugural session. We want to thank you for being here. Click that subscribe button. We want to get to one. Start small. Uh,
Yep.
click the notification so that we're trying to do this weekly, and things may come up, or we may actually have a surprise podcast and come up with something in the middle of the week. And one more thing to look forward to, we're going to have sponsors in the future. Now, there's good news and bad news. The good news is we're going to have sponsors. The bad news is they're not going to pay us money.
Oh,
So just to keep you in suspense, just keep watching until you see our sponsors as we go in the future. So thank you for joining. Ask Ray and Jerry anything about IBM Z, and join us next week for our next exciting session.
catch you at the next one.